You're out of papers, ma'am. Catherine, no more papers. Yeah, there's no more. Okay. It's toasty. But like, I'm not mad about it because I've been cold this whole time. I love your dress.
We're going to start in a few minutes. If you see a worksheet, you are supposed to have that worksheet. It's not just a random piece of paper. You don't have to fill it out right now.
Oh, there's a couple over here. I didn't have enough to pass all the way back. Sorry, guys. oh, it feels so special. Like I'm in the presence of a celebrity. It's warm in here. It's warm in here. Oh, I don't. Do you have?
Did we run out? Did we run out? Yes. I think so. Did we?
Sorry. We ran out of worksheets, guys. So.
Oh, there's one right there.
Oh, there's one over there. Oh,
There's
a
also
spare.
one right there if anyone wants it. No? Yes? No? All right, cool. We're going to get started. Hi. Hi, hello, and good morning. My name is Catherine Martinez. I'm going to be going over the intersectionality of women leaders. So a brief introduction about myself. This is a brief, very brief, but I champion all of my intersectionalities in all of my work. I'm a first-generation American, first-generation college student. I identify as a woman. My pronouns are she, her. And I am a Navy veteran. I went to Tidewater Community College and served as the president of their SVA. I achieved a Associate of Science in Social Sciences before transferring to Old Dominion University, where I was a dual major in sociology and criminal justice with a minor of cybersecurity. I served as the community outreach officer of their SVA chapter and then became the first female president in the 13-year history that OD has had a student veteran organization on campus. And my time in the Navy, I was a sonar technician from 2015 to 2019. I served aboard the USS Winston S. Churchill and the Mid-Atlantic Regional Maintenance Center, and I got out as an E5, but my rank was STG2. So what to expect from this presentation is a brief history of intersectionality, why intersectionality is necessary, learn how to identify your own intersections, how to put intersectionality in practice, and some inspiration. If not, we can laugh together. So what's the history behind intersectionality? It was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989. A fun fact, she's still very much alive and well. She's just in her early 60s and at UCLA. But this term was coined inside the work Mapping the Margins, Intersectionality, Identity Politics, and Violence Against Women of Color. This piece identifies the oppression and identities of Black women during the feminist movement. And a really cool thing about intersectionality is that it does break off into Black women and identifying that they were not always included in big movements like the feminist movement. So what is intersectionality as it's defined? Intersectionality, defined by Kimberly Crenshaw, is that it's a lens which you can see where power comes and collides, where it interlocks and intersects. It is not simply that there is a race problem here, a gender problem here, and a class or LGBTQ problem there. Many times that framework erases what happens to people who are subject to all of these things. On the right-hand side, you have a more technical definition by the YW Boston, which is defining intersectionality as the framework for conceptualizing a person, group of people, or social problem as affected by a number of discriminations and disadvantages. So why is intersectionality necessary? So in an ever-changing society, it is an imperative to be considerate of all perspectives when preparing legislation, reforming social institutions, and developing social welfare programming, etc. Audrey Lord in 1984 encourages people to consider race, class, gender, disability, sexuality, and more in their social movements and critical analysis. A quote why I feel is very powerful and why intersectionality is really important is by Sojourner Truth. Many of you might have seen it before. It's called "And Ain't I a Woman?" That man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any place. And ain't I a woman? So who does this impact? For gender identity, we have women and non-binary persons and other underrepresented minorities like Black, Hispanic, Latinx, Asian, Pacific Islander, Native American, African American, the LGBTQ plus community, and I did separate the transgender specifically under the LGBTQ plus community because it is important to recognize that even though they belong to the LGBTQ plus community, they do experience discrimination and disadvantages within their own community. So, whoops, my slides are out of order. We'll go back. So, I don't know where my transition slide went before this one, but to further go into who does this impact, we're going to look at the Uniform Crime Report, which is published by the FBI, because there are several crimes that go against people, and this goes into why intersectionality is so important. We need to look at all demographics when looking at different ways to practice law or trying to protect people and creating new things to protect our community. So first, we're going to look at this UCR report. These are statistics for hate crimes that took place in 2019. If it bothers you that it's slightly off, they're two cut pieces, and I apologize in advance. So here we have hate crimes identifying race, ethnicity, and ancestry. You can see that there's 3,960 crimes in total, and here you can see how they're broken apart by anti-white, anti-Black, anti-American Indian, anti-Asian, etc. But you could see how the totalities against minorities is significantly higher than anti-white. Below is a segment for sexual orientation, which is anti-gay, anti-lesbian, anti-heterosexual, anti-bisexual, but you can see how the minority is still separate from the majority. When looking at intersectionality, we do look at disability as well, and there are hate crimes against those that are disabled, which is why it is included in this report. So for disability hate crimes, we have anti-physical and anti-mental disabilities that experience hate crimes as well. Here's your gender. Females experience more hate crimes than men. And then for gender identity, you can see that there were 151 anti-gender crimes out of 198. To go back into practice and who this impacts, it does impact women, those who are non-binary and transgender. You may have seen this in the headlines that Texas makes abortion illegal. So Texas law originally passed Senate Bill 8, which makes it illegal to help a pregnant patient obtain an abortion after fetal cardiac arrest is detected, which is usually around 6 weeks of pregnancy. There's a mention of Roe versus Wade, which allows the woman to have the choice to have an abortion or not. But going back to Senate Bill 8, how it was made legal by design, government officials are removed from enforcing law, leaving abortion to providers with no government entity to challenge it in court. I mentioned this specifically because when we look at intersectionality, we really want to look at every part of the problem. When you remove abortion, you're removing access to women who cannot afford to raise a child, people who do not have access to medical care, and that impacts several demographics ranging from Black, Hispanic, and other continuous demographics, but every part of this is why I wanted to include it in this presentation. So, how can you start to identify your own intersections? You want to think about it as a Venn diagram, as it's on your worksheet. If you don't have one, I ran out, I am so sorry. But you want to look at it as a Venn diagram because all these things are interlocking, and you can make those comparisons and contrasts and make it who you are. These bubbles can be labeled as race, ethnicity, gender, identity, sexuality, disability status, and even veteran status, because all of these are things that make up who you are. These categories are not limited to included these categories, but these are the more prominent categories. So I want to introduce Shay right now. She is the Virginia Grassroots Engagement Director for Concerned Veterans of America. She does have a bachelor's of geology from the Texas A&M University. She's also a Navy veteran and served as an aviation bosun's mate and aircraft handler airman aboard the USS Bone Richard. So why I invited her here is to kind of give you an example of using your intersectionalities in practice. As an engagement director, she has to work with several types of people, different types of communities, and engage those communities all at the same time. So when you're putting your intersectionality in practice, you have to first identify your own intersections, and some questions you want to consider is, how do my intersecting identities shape my perspective and the way I experience the world? What disadvantages and privileges do I have that others do not? How does my privilege impact the relationships I have? And how do differences in power and privilege influence the relationships I have with others? So Shay, how does your work put intersectionality into practice?
So in my work, I primarily work in veteran advocacy, and something that's so important to me is, understanding that women are veterans too. 9 times out of 10, you go into a VA clinic and they're like, oh, where's your husband? We've all heard that comment. Or tell your husband or your boyfriend thank you for his service. And we all just look up. You immediately have this look of. So I do work very hard to make sure that my women veterans are included. And furthermore, anybody who thinks that they would immediately be marginalized, I want to immediately break that barrier. This is about all of us as a community. It's not about what the traditional mental image of a veteran is, because that's not the case anymore. This is a new generation. We're making new changes. Representation is important. It is necessary. So in my work, like I said, I try to do my absolute best to make sure everyone feels included, everyone has a voice, everyone gets a seat at a table, a time to speak. That's paramount to what I do. As a person who's an advocate for the community, I have to know what the community needs to be able to advocate for that. And I can't do that if not everybody's at the table.
So I know you pretty well. A part of intersectionality is identifying your privilege as well as your disadvantages in your life and intersections. You mentioned that you were born in the Cherokee Nation. How has that impacted who you are and your work, but also having that problem that you are considered what is called white passing?
Yes. So yes, she's right. I was born on Cherokee reservation land in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. I'm a Cherokee citizen. I have a citizenship card. I'm legit. I'm not, like Great Aunt Gertie told me that we're Cherokee. I got my paperwork. It's honestly, my Cherokee heritage and the way I look is something that I've grappled with for the better part of my adult life, because when you're a child, you don't super think about it, because and especially being on the reservation land, everybody has similar background to you. Everybody looks reasonably similar. So it's not been like so much of a big deal, but when I would get older, I would hear comments, even from family members, that were just generally really nasty things to say about Native Americans. And being that I'm a white passing person, it put a little bit of like a conflict in my own head. Like, am I supposed to want to be white, or am I supposed to be proud of who I am in my Cherokee heritage? And I've decided to choose to be proud of who I am. I've grappled with it, and I've decided this is something that my ancestors died for me to be, and I owe it to them to honor that. And so with that, in my own life, I've started learning my Cherokee language. I'm teaching my son Cherokee language. I have to keep the culture alive for that. But it's been a struggle to grapple with my own intersectionality, but I've come to find that accepting my intersectionality has allowed me to reach out to others who are also struggling with theirs and say, let's talk about it, let's figure it out. We can accept our own intersectionality to accept others who have their different intersectionalities. Does that make any sense?
It does. I have one last question before we move forward. A part of your job as an engagement director and working with policy making, how would you advise others to reach out to other people within their community to ensure that they are asking what they need to be asked in order to create policies that you are currently working on? If that didn't make sense, my bad.
Yeah, no, you're good. No, I would say look around, read the room, ask the questions. If you see somebody that just is a little bit different than you, talk to them. Introduce yourself, let them introduce themselves, and have the conversation. These interpersonal relationships are where the work gets done. It's harder to move the ball by yourself, but if you have the community behind you, it can get done.
Thank you so much, Shay. I appreciate it. Oops, that's the laser pointer. So now it's your turn. If you weren't here earlier, I passed out sheets. I also ran out at the same time. So 25 of you have this sheet in front of you where we talked about that Venn diagram where we kind of go over your own intersections. So at a minimum, would like you to take a few minutes to look at this sheet, fill parts of it out that you feel comfortable with right now, but mainly the last question on how you would put intersectionality into practice within your own work is something I would like you to fill out at this time. So I'll give you like a few minutes to do so. When I see your heads up, I'll assume you're done writing. Some things to consider if you're a little stuck is know that the disadvantages you identify are your own. Your intersections validate your experiences, but also shape who you are. You do not need to over-explain to someone who refuses to understand. And as leaders, we do, however, seek to understand the unique perspective and challenges of others. For the women in the room may have seen this most of us may have seen this on social media if you're active on social media. As a woman, you may be called aggressive, keep being assertive. For the women who are labeled bossy, keep on leading. For the women labeled difficult, keep on telling the truth. For the women who are labeled too much, keep taking up space. To the women who are labeled awkward, keep asking hard questions. The bottom says, please don't shrink yourself to make people happy yourself if you are beautiful in that way. So that's something that you want to take away from your intersectionality, because this happens far too much in my experience as a woman, especially in the Navy and even now. I see quite a few heads up, so I will go ahead and ask if anyone would like to share how would they plan on using their intersections in their own work. You can go up to this mic, you can say your name, you don't have to say your name, and the school you're coming from, and how you plan to use your intersections in your own work.
Hi, my name is Tanya, and I'm from Metro State in Denver, and I'm a social work student, so we do an entire course on privilege, power, oppression, and intersectionality, and understanding our identities. So I'm half Latina, so I grew up with a Spanish-speaking family, and looking at me, I may never actually be the Latina and be able to work with those groups necessarily, but I can still pass on the culture, like to my kids and to my family, for them to learn Spanish. They were going to a language immersion school, and to just pass on the culture. Again, as far as intersectionality and like the color of my skin, it's going to impact the work that I want to do with my own people. So really like white privilege, but me actually, it kind of being a hindrance to working with my own family at times. So I just want to thank you all for your work and thank you for this seminar.
Thanks for sharing. I appreciate it. I'm clapping. Does anyone else want to come up and share how they plan on utilizing their intersections in their own work?
Kat, you know me, I'm not shy. So for those of you who don't know me, I am Krista Brandt. I am also from ODU. I am Kat's VP, and she's amazing. So I actually didn't talk about how I am going to put my intersectionality into practice, but how I already do. I put my intersectionalities into practice by leading by example, owning all parts of my identity without shame, recognizing that someone who shares some or any of my identities will not have the same experiences that I did. And so I need to make I didn't actually finish writing this sentence, so that's why we're flubbing the rest of it. Making sure that I will put forth effort to understanding their experiences, and rather than comparing them against mine, celebrating that our experiences are different and using that to move forward.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Let me get at least one more person. Oh, hello there. What?
Hi, I'm Kiana. I'm also from Old Dominion University. I'm the Public Affairs Officer with the chapter, and I just now really thought about it because you made me think how this really interplays. I would say, because I am half white and half Latina as well, I'm Puerto Rican and Dominican, and I would say just the fact that being mixed is considered my intersectionality comes into play, because there's always that talk of African and American and Black people against white or against Asians, Latinos. Like, it's separate, but there's more conflict and hardship on those who are mixed and interracial. Everybody wants you to pick a side when really you can't, because you can't really label yourself with one or the other because you're both.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fact that you have to choose one or the other, or pressure to choose one, you can't. There's that conflict. And so like being able to like really embrace both or all aspects of what your ethnicity, race, nationality, whatever that may be, that you identify with, and just saying, hey, I'm all part of I'm with you and I'm with you. So just to be embracive of that and not give a fuck about what other people are saying about you or wanting you to think. So part of my language, but yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing.
I think that's a really good point. It's so important that we understand that our diversity is what makes us strong as individuals, as veterans, as active duty, as Americans. It's not what makes us different. Our differences are our competitive edge. That's what makes us better. We have the possibility to look at things from different angles to find the best possible outcome for any given situation. Our intersectionality is the most important thing in our communities and in our society. And the sooner we can embrace that as a society, the better off that we have the potential to be.
Shay, do we have any other person that wants to share something on their sheet? It could be any part of the sheet that talks about even problems that they think aren't often talked about based off of their own intersections. All right, cool.
I thought of something. So I think that, for me especially, I don't look like I have a lot of intersections because I'm a white woman. And so people make a lot of assumptions about your identity. But something important to remember is that you are the only person that can identify yourself. No one else can do that for you. They can make those assumptions, but the assumptions don't matter if that's not how you identify. And so being vulnerable enough to admit that you identify differently, I think is really important, because for a long time in my life, I didn't admit that I identified differently than other people, especially while I was in the military. There was a lot of pressure, and so you kind of conform to what everyone expects your identity to be, and that's really suffocating. And so I found that since I started school and I started, learning more about myself and being more introspective, that I am significantly more free than I have ever been in my life. And I'm in my 30s. Don't tell anybody. And I won't tell you where in my 30s either. You can make that assumption. So my 30s have been the best years of my life because I have finally felt like myself. And being able to admit that I'm bisexual and that I have mental health disabilities and that I, for the longest time, denied all of those things, and that not only am I a veteran, but I'm also a military spouse and a reservist, and all of those things impact me in different ways. And none of my identities are like present all the time. There's always one of them that's like more salient than another one at any given moment. And so embracing whatever part of my identity at that moment feels the most important to me is also something that I think a lot of people need to be aware of, because whenever one part of your identity is standing out more than another, don't shy away from that. Like, embrace that and help others to embrace that with you, because not everyone is willing to do that. And you sometimes have to be your own advocate. And I know that that's challenging. And if you find that, being your own advocate isn't something that you are capable of doing, then you need to find those individuals like Kat and like my advisor, Kim, and my supervisor, Crystal, and my super awesome friend, Kiki, and have those individuals help to boost you up so that you can be confident in yourself and your identities. Because surrounding yourself with people that recognize your identities and they don't question them and they love you regardless of those identities, and they push you to be a better person, those are the type of people that you should surround yourself with. And I think that I've said "and" way too many times. This is like the longest run-on sentence ever. Now last train of thought. So just be comfortable with yourself, and if you need help to get there, find others that can help you be comfortable with yourself. Okay, now I'm done.
I'm glad this meant a lot to you, because you normally don't talk that much about this kind of stuff, so thank you so much. It means a lot. But I didn't make an end slide, so I want to reiterate a point right over here, is that, just like Krista was saying, that your intersections validate your experiences but also shape who you are, and that you do not need to over-explain to someone who refuses to understand. Your intersections are who you are, and how you choose to label and identify yourself will carry and show and be reflective in all of your work. As a first-generation college student, first-generation American, Navy veteran, and a woman, I choose to participate in the work that I can recognize my own privileges and disadvantages, but also recognize the disadvantages of others, because the work that we are doing as leaders is not just for ourselves, it's for those who are coming after us. It's for those who are younger than us, who don't quite understand, and it's up to us in our current generation to make sure that the upcoming generation feels comfortable enough and safe enough to do so. So thank you guys so much for being here. If you guys have any questions or comments, now is the time to do so. You would just have to walk up to the mic and say your name and school if you would like, and your question or comment.
Good morning. Thank you so much for your presentation. My name is Sarah, and I wanted to speak to your question on the worksheet of identities and struggles that are often not talked about. And I responded really strongly to you kind of saying, oh, I have the paperwork, I'm a Native American. And I found myself saying like, oh, I don't have the paperwork. Should I not claim that? And I recognize that that's coming from a space, and I feel sad that we have to even justify that and saying to ourselves, we don't have to explain to people. And so I just wanted to share that I think that's really important, and I think it was you that said, honor that other people's experiences may not be your own, and I think that's important to remember. But I also wanted to share, I'm a 16-year veteran. I'm still serving. I've been traditional reservist all 16 of those years with 2 combat tours. And I think one of the things that I often personally really struggle with still after 16 years is being a female and what the expectations in the world are of me as a female, and then what my experiences in uniform have been. And so I often come into a space where people expect me to be kind and soft-spoken and feminine, and as a mental health professional, for me to listen and to sit and to be quiet. And when I come in with the experiences after being in the military for 16 years, where it is a male-dominated environment, where in order to succeed, I have had to take up space, and I have had to be a leader, and I have had to be assertive. They're not expecting that from me when I come into a space and I don't have my uniform on. And so often these terms that we're describing have been in my life, have been applied to me. And I think that does sometimes take a hit on our self-esteem and our identities and how we feel about ourselves. And I think spaces like this where women, and I also just want to say to the men in the room, like, oh, you guys are awesome for coming to a presentation that is specifically, titled about women, because that kind of support and understanding is also really important. But to kind of have that space where we can come together and say all of your identities are accepted here, and it's okay to push back at what some of those expectations in the world are if you don't meet what those identities are. Because I often have to switch. I'll put on my uniform, one weekend a month, and here I am, very assertive in a leadership position and making decisions and at the table, and then I go back to my civilian job, and it's like a very different perspective of what I'm expected to be. And so I think managing and navigating those different identities in uniform and out of uniform can oftentimes be challenging. So y'all are doing a great job.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Hi, I'm Abby Peterson. I'm from Rutgers University. I just wanted to make a comment about pretty much everybody in this room and just the experiences I've had this week. I cannot get over just the incredible leadership that is among us. For example, what was just said, I think that's just an incredible, having self-awareness, being able to really develop a space for others. And there was a comment made this morning, and I can't remember her name, but she said one of her roles as an SVA leader was to basically make space for people to be who they are. When I first transitioned out of the Marine Corps, I went right into a marketing job. I thought, I had all my ducks in a row. I had it all figured out. And I got to this female-dominated environment where all of a sudden there were so many assumptions being made. And it was like, whoa, you have no idea what I did in the military. I was a public affairs officer. I wasn't, in the infantry. And it was like the wheels were not really turning for a lot of people. And so I think this space, starting with like veteran ERGs and finding your community that way, I think is just such an important thing to do. So I'm really grateful for everyone here and for what you guys are talking about today.
Thank you so much for sharing. I appreciate it.
I just want to give a quick recommendation. So I'm Renee, I'm from TCU, and something we recently had was a women's seminar for vets or female vets only on our campus. So we had a luncheon, and it was spread out between 3 months, and it was actually really, really cool because at the beginning we only had students, and then we ended up having like faculty, and I think at one point we had like a custodian, like female Marine veteran that had served for 20 years, and she ended up coming to our luncheon. And so now I have a few of them reach out to me occasionally and ask, like, hey, when are we going to do this again? Hey, this is something we really liked. We really needed it. So if you ladies and gentlemen are not doing this yet, I think it's a great opportunity to connect, because I think that female veterans, we are kind of a different, we're a different genre. Like, we definitely like experience different things. And even for me, I was in field artillery, and so like I was the only female in my whole battalion. And so if I'm being completely honest, a lot of this stuff, like, I'm like, I don't want to talk about that. Like, I definitely didn't talk about that. Like, let's not talk about that. And so, I mean, even hearing you, don't want to talk about it, you know? And so, like, this stuff, like us coming together and having lunch like this, we're all different. We've all had different experiences in the military. And then now as civilians, I've kind of found that even though we were completely different in the military, we all kind of experienced the same thing. So, like, I just think a recommendation is, like, I'm assuming a lot of you are SVA leaders, like sending out an email to the student vets, female vets, and being like, hey, like, let's have a luncheon together, just female vets, and like, let's talk about it, because it kind of seemed like they really needed it, or we all really needed it. So just a recommendation of something we do at TCU is we had a luncheon and we had a mini women's seminar for female vets on campus, and it was great. It turned out great, so.
Love that.
That's a really great idea and a great way to bring people together. Intersectionality can be an uncomfortable conversation if you're still struggling with parts of your identity. But I would recommend, if you do that, I would send it as an email to everybody on your mailing list, because those who may identify as transgender or non-binary may not have like a typical female-sounding name due to legal reasons. So I would just make sure that you send it out to everyone so everyone feels included and those don't feel excluded just because of their name. But if there are no other questions or comments, that is it.
I've got one. I've got one. No, I wanted to clarify. You brought up a really great point. Nobody can tell you what your identity is. That's your decision. This is your life. This is your path. Whatever your identity is, own it, embrace it, join the community. This is your life. Make it a happy one. Yeah, that's it.
Unrelated, do you guys care if I take your guys' picture? Because this is pretty cool to see this room pretty much filled, to see how many people care about intersectionality of women leaders. Cool. Awesome. No. No. This is my point of view. Point of view. Okay, so on the count of three, you guys
everybody
can
say
like, do
cheese.
something. All right, cool. One, two, and three. Oh, someone just walked through the door. All right, cool. Thank you guys so much for being here, and I'll see you guys at the closing ceremony.